I'm a storyteller, so this is what I do. Now, I'm also a meditator. And my meditation teacher tells me that in order to be fully present, I have to drop my story. Right? And, for me, that's kind of difficult, being a storyteller, and I have a big story. And what he's talking about is the things that we tell ourselves about who we are and what we do and why we're who we are and what we do, et cetera, the things that run in our heads, right? Very hard to drop. I personally am quite attached to my story of who I am, right? I mean, mine goes something like this, okay? I'm emotionally abandoned, highly critical, very sensitive, doggedly self-centered, not good at sports, but an excellent speaker. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, right? And it can really, really stick, right? So much so that it's impermeable and hard to get away from. In fact, in my childhood, I formed neural pathways that reinforce that story so that the story can come back repeatedly with musical accompaniment in my head whenever I need it, and especially when I don't need it. And don't tell me that you don't know what I'm talking about, because we all have those stories that we tell ourselves about who we are that run through our heads. That's why every year on High Holy Days, we get to work on the same old stuff, right? Okay. But the good news is, I mentioned those neural pathways that we create. The good news is that we now know we have neuroplasticity, right? And that means that our brains can recreate, make new pathways at any stage of life, right? And I suggest that can go a little deeper than just making pathways in the brain, right? I mean, this is Jewish renewal, right? We've got the four worlds, so we can have four-world plasticity, right? We can reach deeper into the body, heart, mind, and soul, and try to breathe a little air into that, right? Especially at High Holy Days, those, let's say, the wiring between the connections of the body, heart, mind, and soul of the four worlds, the wiring is a little bit softer, looser, and more plastic, right? So I forgot what I was going to say. And my biggest prayer at High Holy Days now is, as I age, that I won't forget the words. But anyway, I have a story about that dropping or keeping the story. My teacher tells me I have to drop the story, and it actually takes a lot of courage to do that, right? And on a good day even, I can't really drop the story, but sometimes I can loosen my grip on it, right? And its grip on me, and maybe peek a little around the edges of it. So here's a story to maybe inspire us to loosen our grip on our view of the world and ourselves. Once, there was a very pious woman named Sarah, and she believed fully in God. She led a mitzvah-centered life. She was always doing good deeds and always praying, and she always had faith in God. Well, not all the time, because once in a while her faith would waver a little bit. She'd look around the world and she'd see things that did not seem right. And so she would pray to God, and she would say, Rabbono Shalom, I hate to say anything bad, but I'm not feeling so good about what I see in the world. My neighbor, Chaimi, well, he's such a good man. He and his wife are always doing good deeds, but last month their house burned down and now they're destitute. Is that fair? And then, on the other hand, there are people who, I'm not going to mention any names, I don't want to say anything bad, you know who I'm talking about. There are people who are not so nice and who are cruel and greedy, and they seem to be getting rewarded. They get richer and richer, and it doesn't seem fair. Well, she went on this way with God and nothing changed. In fact, the more she looked around, the more she could see bad things happening to good people and good things happening to bad people. So she got a little more serious about her prayer. And she said, Rabbona Shalom, I am getting really, really confused. I don't see your ways in the world. I don't see how it's working out. I'm getting confused. I'm getting depressed, and I need your help. In fact, I have a suggestion of how you could help me. If only I could see Elijah, the prophet, and watch him work. If I could see Elijah doing your holy work, then life would make sense. And she got serious about this prayer. She prayed and she prayed and she fasted and she prayed and she fasted. And be careful what you pray and fast for. Heads up, Yom Kippur is coming, because you might get what you pray for. A few days later, she was walking through an open field, and she saw coming towards her a rumpled man with white hair and a long white beard. And if you are in a Jewish story and you see a rumpled man with long white hair and a long beard walking towards you, you know it was. And he said, I am Elijah. What can I do you for? And she said, Elijah, thank you for coming. I just want one thing. I want to go with you, and I want to see you do your holy work, to see you do God's work, the miracles you do in the world. And he said, that's not going to happen. You see, I'm a very, very busy guy doing God's work. And if you came along, that would slow me down. And if you saw what I do, you wouldn't understand what I do. And if you didn't understand what I do, you would ask questions. And if you ask questions, I would have to answer your questions. And I would have to explain and explain and explain. And that would really slow me down. As I said, I have a lot to do. That is not going to work. And she said, Elijah, I beg you, and I promise, I will not say a word. I will not ask any questions. I won't disturb you at all. And he said, all right, but if you do, I will disappear. And she said, good, perfect, let's go. And so they went out into the night, and they came to a little hut. Elijah knocked on the door, and inside there was an elderly couple, very poor. But they invited them in so warmly, and they gave them what little food they had to eat, a little bit of milk from their only cow and a few scraps of bread. They talked with them, they joked with them, they studied together. When it was time to go to bed, they gave them their own beds, and they slept on the floor. And as they were leaving the next morning, they walked by the couple's cow, their only cow, the cow that they depended on for sustenance. And Elijah made a little sign with his hand, and that cow dropped dead. And Elijah walked right on, and Sarah walked behind him, and she knew she wasn't supposed to say anything, so she muttered to herself, that doesn't happen. How could they? Those people are so kind. And the cow, how could he? That doesn't make any sense. And Elijah turned around and he said, and Sarah was quiet. And then they went to another house. This one, you might have guessed, was a large house, a mansion, and in it was a very wealthy man. But that man did not even bother to come to the door. He sent his servants, and they didn't even give them anything to eat. They sent them out to sleep in the barn, going to bed hungry, sleeping on the hay. And when they left, the next morning, Elijah walked by a tree in front of the house that had blown over in a storm. And he made a motion with his hand, and that tree righted itself and rooted itself again in the ground, stronger than ever. And Elijah kept walking along, and Sarah walked behind him, and she said, oh, I can't see anything, but that does not feel good. That man is so why did you do that? And Elijah turned around and he said, shh. And said she was quiet. And next they came to a synagogue. It was a very large, fancy synagogue, not like the Havurah. It was made of silver and gold. The pews were lined with gold, and sitting in the pews were people dressed in very fancy clothing, but those people didn't even turn around and give Elijah and Sarah the time of day. They even heard one of them say, "Oh, we don't need to bother with people like that." And after the service, they didn't invite them to share their food. They didn't talk with them. They totally ignored them. And as they went to leave, Elijah turned around to the people and he said, "I bless you that you should have many leaders." And then he walked out. Sarah followed him and she said, "Many leaders, huh? Many leaders. I can't say anything, but that does not seem fair." And Elijah said, and they walked further. And this time they came to a humble little synagogue, kind of like the Havurah. And everybody there, well, they were dressed like we are, and they were very friendly. And everyone talked to them, and after the service they welcomed them. They asked them where they were from. They shared their food with them. The Oneg, they had a gluten-free potluck. They had a wonderful time. And when it was done, Elijah stood at the door and he said, "I bless you that you should have just one leader." And then he went out. And Sarah said, "I don't care if you disappear. I have to know what's going on. None of the things that you did made any sense to me. In fact, they were the exact opposite of what I expected, and I am even more confused than ever. Please." And Elijah said, "All right, I'll explain. Not everything is as it seems. The poor couple whose house we went to, that night, that woman was destined to die. And I pleaded with God to take the cow instead. And at the wealthy man's house, that tree that had blown over, underneath it was a buried treasure. When I righted that tree, I did it so that that treasure wouldn't fall into the hands of that already rich but greedy man. And when we went to the synagogue with the fancy people, the cold people, that blessing I gave them, that was not a blessing, that was a curse. Because too many leaders cannot make any decisions or ever get anything done. And at the small synagogue, the blessing I gave for one leader was a great blessing, because it is said that one good leader is worth more than a room full of fools. So you see, Sarah, not everything is as it seems on the surface. It's not possible. It's not possible to understand the ways of God. We have to drop our notions of good and bad and right and wrong in order to see the divine underneath. And Sarah nodded her head. She went back to her life, and she saw the world with new eyes. So I bless us all that we see the world in a new way this High Holy Days, that we take advantage of that four-world plasticity that's radiating through the universe at this time of year, so we can loosen our grip on our stories and really feel the light of the divine. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.